Hi, this is Nick on the 31st of August with the fourth episode of this week's podcast or video broadcast, whatever you want to call them, on this week's theme of vulnerability. And I want to share with you a little quote in a minute that I came across. And when I read this quote, just a part of me kind of relaxed and went, oh, this is so lovely to hear. Because I think as a boy, I felt, when I was growing up, I felt quite scared and vulnerable a lot of the time. And I think my hope was that, one day I would reach a level of grown-upness where I didn't have to feel vulnerable anymore, that I would have somehow kind of either escaped or matured enough that I wouldn't have any vulnerability. And it seemed to be a bit of a journey with no end. It's like, when am I going to stop feeling so vulnerable? And I suppose I used it as a form of self-judgment, really. And I would say to myself, oh, hi, I see Mary's joined live. Hi, Mary, good to see you. Welcome. I think I used my vulnerability in order to judge myself. And, I think what we all do, and I certainly do, is I'll take anything that comes my way to judge myself. It doesn't matter really what it is. So, I would often use my vulnerability to judge myself and say, what's wrong with me that I feel so vulnerable? So I turned it into, there must be something wrong with me. And I suppose I was on a quest for a long time to think, well, how do I get past this vulnerability stuff? I just don't like feeling so scared and afraid a lot of the time. Especially as a man, I just didn't like it. And then a while ago I came across this, and I'm just going to read it to you, from Madeleine, I don't know how to pronounce it, it's French, I presume, L'Engle, I'll post the quote underneath this video. But she says, when we were children, we used to think that when we were grown up, we would no longer feel vulnerable. But to grow up is to accept vulnerability. To be alive is to be vulnerable, she writes. And when I read that, part of me just went, oh, why didn't somebody tell me that a few decades ago? Why didn't I come across that quote a few decades ago? And just part of me was able to kind of relax and to soften a bit and go, oh, there's nothing wrong with me, To be alive is to be vulnerable. We have incredible strengths and powers, and we have our human weaknesses and we have our human vulnerabilities, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with us whatsoever. It is just the territory of being alive and being in a body. We're going to have them. So, when I came across this a few years ago, I just kind of relaxed a bit. So really, this is the spirit in which I share this idea with you today. And tomorrow I'm going to share another little story that happened to me a couple of years ago, which really helped me kind of relax into this whole area of vulnerability. So Mary's just saying, thank you, powerful quote, Nick. I think everyone should be told that early on, and I think this is part of my work, is accepting our human vulnerability. So I think the mature thing is not to resist it or to judge ourselves for having it, but to go, okay, if I'm alive and I'm feeling scared sometimes and I'm feeling vulnerable, even feeling terrified sometimes, how do I handle that in a kind of mature, grown-up way? Not how do I get rid of it, but how do I handle it? How do I handle my own inner world? How do I handle my own emotional life? I think that's one of the questions that has guided my life, is like, how do I handle these feelings that I have? How do I handle my emotional life? Both the good stuff, the inspiration, the love, the joy that I feel, and the fear and the doubt and the questioning and the self-judgment that I can feel, and vulnerability that goes with all of that at times. So that's today's thought. To be alive is to be vulnerable at times. And, for us, it's how do we learn to handle that? How do we accept it? How do we handle it? And I think the two things for me go very much together. The more we're able simply to accept it, actually the easier it becomes to handle. But when we're resisting it or somehow judging the vulnerability, then it's harder to handle. So, well, thank you, Mary, for joining live. God bless. I'll be back tomorrow with another story about how I've learned to soften around this whole area of vulnerability. God bless. Bye-bye.